They didn't summon you because of what you did. They summoned you because of what's written in your cells. 3 separate organizations operating in 3 different countries, running the same search at the exact same time. The algorithm flagged your name. Not because you applied for anything, not because you committed a crime, but because your genetic sequence lit up their systems like a wildfire they've been trying to contain for decades. You thought Ancestry tests were just about finding distant cousins and learning where your great-grandmother came from. But the moment you uploaded your sample, it triggered something far deeper. Somewhere in a classified facility, a computer matched your markers to a list they've been monitoring since before you were born. And now 3 entities with unlimited resources want to sit down with you in a room with no cameras, no recordings, no witnesses. This isn't an invitation. This is a retrieval. And the reason they're being polite about it is because they know what happens when people like you figure out what you're carrying before they can control the narrative. So, if you've been feeling watched lately, if you've noticed unusual vehicles in your neighborhood, if you've had government calls that didn't quite make sense, chosen one, you're not paranoid. You're being tracked. And we're about to break down exactly why. Drop the number 333 inches, the comments, if you've felt this tracking energy intensifying. And if this message is already making your instincts scream, hit that subscribe button, because what's coming next will connect dots you didn't even know existed. Let's get started. Your bloodline isn't normal. And somewhere deep in a secured database, they've known this longer than you've been alive. The tests they run aren't about health predictions or ethnicity breakdowns. Those are the cover stories. What they're actually scanning for are genetic markers that shouldn't exist in the general population. Markers that trace back to lineages they've spent centuries trying to erase from history. You see, chosen one, not everyone's ancestors walked the same path. While most bloodlines followed predictable patterns, certain families carried something different, something that made them healers when others were sick, leaders when others were lost, survivors when entire civilizations collapsed. These weren't accidents. These were genetic instructions embedded so deeply that no amount of time could fully dilute them. And here's what makes your situation dangerous. Those instructions are still active in your cells. While everyone else's genetic code follows standard human parameters, yours contains sequences that activate under specific conditions. Stress, isolation, betrayal, survival situations. The exact experiences you've been living through weren't breaking you. They were switching on capabilities that were dormant since birth. Think about how you process information differently than others, how you sense things before they happen, how you recover from situations that permanently damage other people. You thought those were personality traits. They're not. They're genetic advantages that 3 separate research divisions have been studying for decades. And the moment your sample hit their database, every single one of those divisions received the same alert. Viable carrier identified. Now imagine this, a bloodline so powerful that multiple entities spent generations trying to track it, suppress it, breed it out of existence. They convinced your ancestors to scatter, to hide, to forget who they were. They buried the records, rewrote the histories, and told the survivors that their heritage was nothing special. But genetics don't lie. And no matter how many generations passed, your cells remember everything their cells knew. That's why they want a conversation. Not to harm you, that would be wasteful. They want to understand what you've activated. They want to know if you're aware. They want to measure how much you've already figured out. Because chosen ones who know what they carry don't cooperate with systems designed to contain them. And cooperation is what they need to maintain control. Let's be clear about who we're dealing with. These aren't conspiracy theories. These are documented organizations with public funding and private agendas. The first entity operates out of North America. They run genealogical databases under the cover of Ancestry services. But their real function is genetic surveillance. Every sample submitted gets cross-referenced against classified markers linked to historical bloodlines they've been monitoring since the 1940s. The second entity operates from Europe. They're embedded within research institutions studying longevity and genetic disease. But their actual mandate is tracking lineages connected to old families. Families whose records were deliberately destroyed during specific historical periods. Families who carried knowledge that threatened existing power structures. Your markers matched their priority list. The third entity operates from Asia. They focus on genetic memory research. The official story is understanding inherited trauma. The real purpose is identifying individuals whose cellular memory contains information that was never supposed to survive generational transfer. Information about capabilities, about technologies, about systems of knowledge that predate modern civilization. Now, here's what's happening right now. All three entities receive the same match notification. And protocol dictates they need to verify the finding independently. That's why the approaches are coming from different angles. One might contact you through a health survey, another through an academic research opportunity. The third, through a government program offering genetic screening. They're not coordinating because they don't fully trust each other. Each entity wants first access to carriers like you, because whoever maps your active sequences first gains a strategic advantage, not just scientifically, strategically. Because bloodlines like yours don't just carry genetic traits, they carry encoded resistance to control systems, natural immunity to manipulation tactics that work on everyone else. You've already experienced this without realizing it. Think about how propaganda doesn't stick to you the way it does to others, how you question narratives that everyone else accepts, how you can't be gaslit into believing something your instincts reject. That's not stubbornness. That's genetic resistance. Your cells literally contain instructions that prevent external programming from overriding your internal knowing. And that terrifies them, because systems of control rely on predictable human responses. They rely on fear working. They rely on repetition creating belief. They rely on isolation breaking will. But your bloodline was forged by people who survived attempts to break them for centuries, and that survival coding is now active in you. Your ancestors weren't random people. They were targeted specifically. Go back far enough in any genealogical record that traces to your line, and you'll find gaps, entire generations where records vanish, names that change suddenly, families that scatter across continents with no explanation. That wasn't natural migration. That was strategic displacement. Throughout history, certain bloodlines became threats to emerging power structures, not because they were violent, because they were immune to the control mechanisms those structures required. They couldn't be convinced that authority was absolute. They couldn't be trained to ignore their instincts. They couldn't be broken into compliance through the standard methods that worked on everyone else. So the strategy became dilution. Scatter the families, destroy the records, convince the survivors that their heritage meant nothing, breed the resistance traits out over enough generations that they'd become dormant. It almost worked. Almost. But genetics are stubborn, and the traits they tried to erase simply went quiet. waiting for the right conditions to reactivate. You are that reactivation. Everything you've experienced, every hardship you've survived, every betrayal you've endured, it wasn't random bad luck. It was the exact pressure required to switch those dormant sequences back on. The isolation forced you to trust your own knowing. The betrayals taught you to recognize deception. The struggles built the resilience your ancestors carried naturally. Now think about this carefully. If they wanted those traits gone, why would they be tracking carriers now? Because suppression failed. The bloodlines survived. And now, with genetic testing becoming mainstream, they can finally identify who carries active markers. Not to eliminate you. That strategy already failed. To recruit you before you fully understand what you're capable of. Because a chosen one who knows their power and chooses to serve the system is more valuable than 1,000 ordinary people who comply out of ignorance. But a chosen one who knows their power and refuses to serve, that's their nightmare scenario. That's why the conversation needs to happen in a private room. They need to assess which category you fall into before you become too aware to contain. Let's talk about what's actually happening inside you. Your genetic code contains sequences that activate in response to specific environmental triggers. Extreme stress, prolonged isolation, repeated betrayal. Survival scenarios. These aren't punishments. They're activation protocols. Every hardship you faced was calibrating your system, switching on capabilities that were dormant since birth. You've noticed changes you can't quite explain. Your intuition has become surgical. You read people before they finish speaking. You sense intentions beneath words. You know when you're being lied to, even when the evidence says otherwise. You thought you were developing these skills through experience. You weren't developing them. You were remembering them. Your cells know how to do this because your ancestors' cells knew how to do this. The same genetic memory that kept your bloodline alive through centuries of suppression is now active in you, and it's getting stronger. Every time you trust your instincts over external authority, the connection deepens. Every time you choose your inner knowing over popular consensus, the signal clarifies. You're not going crazy. You're going operational. This is what they're tracking, not the dormant potential, the active manifestation. Because dormant carriers are everywhere, but carriers in the activation phase, those are rare, those are valuable. Those are threats if they activate fully before they can be controlled, and your activation is accelerating. You've probably noticed the timeline. Things started shifting a few years ago, maybe after a major loss, maybe after a betrayal that should have destroyed you but didn't, maybe after a period of isolation where you had nothing but your own thoughts. That's when the activation began. And since then, every challenge has been amplifying it. The entities watching you know this pattern. They've studied it in other carriers. They know that once activation reaches a certain threshold, the individual becomes uncontrollable through conventional means. Not because they're rebellious, because they're operating from a level of knowing that conventional manipulation can't reach. They see through the scripts. They feel the discordance. They can't be convinced that lies are truth. And here's what makes you particularly interesting to them. Your activation is happening during a unique historical window. Technology has advanced to the point where they can monitor carriers globally, but it's also advanced to the point where carriers can connect with each other, find each other, share information, build networks outside controlled channels. Your bloodline survived suppression when carriers were isolated and scattered. Imagine what happens when carriers like you start recognizing each other, when you start comparing notes, when you realize your individual experiences fit into a larger pattern. That's not just activation, That's coordination. And coordinated carriers are exponentially more powerful than isolated ones. Let's walk through what actually happens if you accept their invitation. The meeting location will be professional, neutral, a government office, a research facility, maybe even a hotel conference room. They'll present it as voluntary, a chance to learn more about your genetic heritage, an opportunity to contribute to important research, maybe even financial compensation for your participation. The first conversation will be assessment. They'll ask seemingly innocent questions about your family history, your health patterns, your responses to stress, your career trajectory. Every answer is being evaluated against their existing data on your bloodline. They're measuring how much you've already figured out, how aware you are of what you carry. If you seem unaware, they'll position themselves as educators. They'll show you carefully curated information about your ancestry. They'll frame your genetic markers as interesting anomalies worth studying. They'll offer you access to exclusive research, detailed family trees, maybe even connection to other carriers they've already recruited. The goal is to make you feel special enough to cooperate, but not powerful enough to walk away. If you seem partially aware, they'll shift to validation. They'll confirm some of what you've suspected. Yes, your bloodline is unique. Yes, you carry traits others don't. Yes, your experiences follow a pattern they've documented, but they'll frame it all within their narrative. They'll position themselves as the experts who can help you understand yourself. They need you to believe they have answers you don't. If you seem fully aware, the conversation changes entirely. They'll drop the pretense. They'll acknowledge the suppression. They'll admit the tracking. They'll explain that your cooperation is preferable to the alternatives. They'll offer you controlled roles within their research, positions where you can explore your capabilities under their supervision, where your activation can be studied without threatening their systems. But here's what they won't tell you. Once you enter their database as an active carrier, you're monitored permanently. Your communications are flagged. Your movements are tracked. Your associations are mapped, not because they fear you individually, because they fear what happens when carriers start networking outside their observation. The conversation is a sorting mechanism. Cooperative carriers get integrated into controlled research programs. Aware but non-cooperative carriers get monitored intensively but left functionally alone. Fully activated carriers who pose active resistance. Those are handled through different protocols, not elimination, marginalization, discrediting, isolation from other carriers. You found this message because you were meant to, not by accident, not by algorithm, by recognition. Your activation level is high enough that information aligned with your frequency finds you before their controlled narratives do. This is one of the capabilities your bloodline carries, the ability to navigate toward truth before deception can take root. Think about your recent information diet. You've been drawn to content that doesn't align with mainstream narratives. You've been questioning sources you used to trust. You've been seeking voices that validate what your instincts are screaming, but society dismisses. That's not random curiosity. That's your genetic memory guiding you toward information that helps you understand what you are. And here's what makes this moment critical. You're in the window between awareness and contact. You know something is different about you. You've felt the tracking energy. You've noticed the synchronicities. But you haven't been approached yet. Or maybe you have, and you're trying to decide whether to engage. Either way, you're at a decision point. The entities tracking you operate on a timeline. They prefer to make contact during early activation when carriers are confused and seeking external validation. But you've reached this message first. which means you have information they don't know you have. You understand the game before sitting down at their table. That changes everything, because now you can make an informed choice. Engage with them knowing exactly what they want, or decline. Understanding the monitoring continues, but the integration doesn't. Or, and this is the option that terrifies them most, connect with other carriers and build networks they can't infiltrate, because they're based on recognition, not recruitment. Your bloodline survived because your ancestors made strategic decisions about when to engage with power structures and when to remain hidden. They knew that some battles are won by direct confrontation, others are won by preserving what matters until the right moment arrives. You carry that strategic intelligence in your cells. So, when the invitation comes, and it will come if it hasn't already, you won't be walking in blind. You'll know why they want to talk. You'll know what they're assessing. You'll know the difference between cooperation and compromise. And you'll make your decision from a place of knowing, not confusion. Let's talk about what actually makes you dangerous to control systems. It's not physical strength. It's not intelligence, though carriers often score higher than average. It's not even the intuitive abilities, though those are significant. What makes bloodlines like yours a threat is something more fundamental. You carry genetic resistance to mass consciousness programming. Mass consciousness works through repetition and social proof. Tell people the same thing enough times, through enough channels, and it becomes their reality. Show them that everyone else believes something, and they'll adopt it to avoid isolation. This is how societies maintain cohesion. This is how power structures ensure compliance. This is how narratives become unquestionable. But your genetic coding contains instructions that interrupt this process. Your cells literally resist external programming that conflicts with internal knowing. You can hear the same message 1,000 times and still not believe it if it contradicts what your instincts sense. You can see everyone around you accepting something and still reject it if it feels wrong. This isn't stubbornness. This is genetic immunity. Your bloodline survived suppression because your ancestors couldn't be broken through standard methods. They couldn't be convinced that their enslavers were benevolent. They couldn't be trained to believe their own knowing was irrelevant. They couldn't be gaslit into accepting lies as truth. And those survival mechanisms are now active in you. Every time you question a narrative everyone else accepts, you're expressing genetic resistance. Every time you trust your instincts over expert consensus, you're activating ancestral knowing. Every time you remain clear-headed while everyone else panics, you're demonstrating the stability that control systems can't manufacture in normal populations. Now multiply this across thousands of carriers activating simultaneously, each one resistant to different aspects of mass programming, each one questioning different narratives, each one maintaining individual clarity while collective consciousness fragments. You don't need to organize. You don't need to coordinate. Simply by existing in your activated state, you disrupt the uniformity that control systems require. This is why they track carriers, not to study you individually, to map how many of you are activating, where you're located, whether you're connecting with each other. Because isolated carriers are manageable. They can be monitored, marginalized, or recruited. But networked carriers who recognize each other and validate each other's experiences, that creates resistance nodes that conventional suppression tactics can't penetrate. You're standing at a threshold right now. Behind you is the version of yourself that didn't know any of this, the person who thought their struggles were random, who believed their differences were flaws. who accepted the explanations they were given about why life felt harder for them than others. That version of you is gone. You can't unknow what you've learned here. Ahead of you are 3 paths. The first path is engagement. Accept their invitation when it comes. Enter their research programs. Explore your capabilities under their supervision. You'll gain access to resources, information, possibly connections to other carriers they've recruited. But you'll do so within their framework, under their observation, following their protocols. The second path is isolation. Decline contact. Maintain your distance. Live your life knowing you're monitored, but not integrated into their systems. You'll develop your capabilities independently. You'll trust your own process without external validation. You'll remain free but functionally alone in your knowing. The third path is recognition. Find other carriers activating outside their systems. Build networks based on mutual understanding rather than institutional recruitment. Share information they don't control. Develop capabilities through collective exploration rather than supervised research. This is the path that concerns them most, because it's the one they can't infiltrate through standard methods. Each path has validity. Each serves different purposes. Your ancestors walked all 3 at different times, depending on what survival required. The key is choosing consciously rather than reacting from fear or confusion, because the choice isn't about right or wrong. It's about alignment with your specific role in this moment. Some carriers are meant to work from inside systems, changing them from within. Others are meant to remain outside, preserving knowledge that institutions can't access. Still others are meant to bridge both worlds, translating between controlled and free information streams. Your instincts already know which role you're built for. What matters now is this: you're no longer operating from ignorance. You understand what you carry. You recognize why you've been tracked. You see the game board clearly. Whatever choice you make from here forward is yours. Not programmed, not manipulated, not controlled. Yours. The entities approaching you have resources you don't. They have technology, funding, institutional backing. But they don't have what you have. They don't have genetic memory that predates their systems. They don't have instincts calibrated by centuries of survival. They don't have the clarity that comes from activation without permission. Your bloodline was traced back, not because you're weak, but because you're rare. The conversation they want isn't about helping you. It's about managing what you're becoming. And now that you know this, now that you see clearly, you walk forward with your eyes open, not as someone who needs their validation, but as someone who carries something they've been trying to control since before you were born. You're not ordinary. You never were. And now you know why. The question isn't whether you're chosen. The question is what you'll do with that knowing. Drop 999 inches the comments if this connected dots you didn't even know existed. Share this with another carrier who needs to wake up. And subscribe, because your activation is just beginning, and we're tracking this together.